The city was all hum and heat, pressed into a steel spine that rattled toward Harlem. I stood inside the train car with my palm hooked on the overhead bar, the floor thudding a rhythm I already knew by heart. Night flickered past the windows in torn strips. Graffiti, brick, the tired shine of stations sliding away. A trio of teens traded jokes at one end of the car. A woman in a cobalt blazer dozed with her phone face down on her lap, and somewhere a saxophone leaked from cheap earbuds, just a ribbon of sound that made everything feel like a film I might wander out of at any moment. I was not thinking about love. I was thinking about rent, and the early bake at the cafe, and how Cinnamon always insisted on my clothes like a promise I hadn't made but somehow kept anyway. I was thinking about lists: flour, sugar, limes for the tart, milk for the house drinks. A life built of small tasks and the relief of finishing them one by one, brick by brick, breath by breath. I told myself that the quiet I lived in was proof I'd survived worse noise. The doors thumped open at 59th. The car inhaled a new wave of bodies, and then I saw him. He stepped in like he had been appointed to the moment. Tall, jacket cut close, tie loosened the way men in magazines pretended exhaustion looked good on them. He was not from the train, and yet here he was. Handsome in the kind of way that makes the air notice. He didn't scan the car like everyone else did. He chose a space across from me and took it. One hand to the same overhead rail, knuckles near the rectangle of emergency instructions. The lights washed over his face and drew clean lines. A jaw set with patience, a mouth that knew how to wait. We looked. Not a stare that dares, not a dare that threatens. Something quieter and louder at once. The kind of look that says, I see you without asking for anything, and still asks everything. It lasted the length of 2 breaths, maybe 3. Then, as if the city had permission to move again, the train jolted and I remembered to have bones. I found the floor, found my balance, found the old habit of shrinking to make room. But he didn't lean into me or away from me. He simply adjusted to the sway in a way that made space feel gentle. A small grace, too small to mean anything and yet somehow not small at all. I kept telling myself to stop looking as if my eyes were hands. I counted rivets above the door. I read the PSA about track safety. I thought about the lemon glaze I had to whisk before sunrise and whether the new barista would remember to cut the parchment to size. I named everything I could name until naming ran out. And still there he was. I watched him in reflections, the glass stuttering him into a dozen men and then back to one. He didn't fidget with his phone. He didn't perform himself for the car. He stood like the train belonged to him and to everyone else too, like power could be courteous. When the car braked, his hand tightened on the rail. The tendons on his wrist rose, a brief flare under skin, and it felt indecent to be moved by something so ordinary. A station slid past. Another. The saxophone grew brighter and then disappeared in the static of an announcement. The teenagers tumbled out. The woman in cobalt woke with a start and smiled at nothing. And I thought, if you were a different woman, you would step forward and say hello, but I have been other women before. I know the price of walking toward a flame without checking who built the fire. The train curved. The car's weight leaned left and a paper cup rolled down the aisle, tapping both our shoes before it settled against his. He reached for it at the same time I did. The plastic lids kissed with a small, silly clack. Our fingers didn't touch. They nearly did. That almost made it worse. He smiled, the first part of him that moved toward me. Not arrogant, not apologetic. A real smile, the kind that recognizes the moment without trying to own it. I felt it in my throat, in the soft place behind my ribs where I store all the unsent letters. The doors opened again. A woman dragged a suitcase in, wrestling it like a stubborn animal, and he stepped back to let her pass. He glanced at me as she did, just a flick of attention with weight to it as if to say, I saw you. Not just the accident at our feet. I dipped my chin, unwilling to give the moment a name it couldn't carry. Next stop, 125th. The overhead voice was bored with our lives. I wasn't. I could feel the city gathering itself outside. All that red brick and late-night bodegas and voices spilling out of open doors. Home was there, and the kitchen timer in my head said, flour at 5, ovens warm by 5:15, first batch by 6. My life kept me like a rhythm keeps a dancer who learned the steps alone. He watched the station name crawl along the digital sign. I watched his watch, black face, simple band, because it was easier than watching his eyes. He was the kind of man who could be a story you tell your friends or a story you never mention, because saying it out loud would make it too real. I didn't know which one I wanted.
You must be Zion.
When the train softened into the platform, we both turned toward the door. The car exhaled a crowd onto the yellow line. The tunnel breathed back its cool iron breath. In the small shuffling moment when bodies rearranged, his shoulder came level with mine. I smelled rain on wool and something like cedar, as if he had been outside just long enough to carry weather in with him. Evening, he said, one word, a test balloon, low, unhurried, a voice that didn't need to claim anything to make its presence known. Evening, I returned, and it came out steadier than I felt. We hung there on the edge of the platform like a held note. The train doors chimed. The crowd pulled us forward. I could have stayed on. I could have stepped off one station too late just to see what would happen if I let the universe improvise. Instead, I did the sensible thing. I went home to my lists. He stepped out with me, boots hitting the platform a breath after mine. We were parallel for 3 strides, then 4. On the 5th, he slowed as if listening to a music I couldn't hear. I looked back without turning my head, an old skill. It keeps you alive. His gaze met mine cleanly, no game in it. Only that same undeniable seeing. The doors slid shut. The train departed, dragging sparks along the track like a trail of stars. We stood in the sudden quiet, the way people stand in a church they didn't mean to enter. "Good night," he said. "Good night," I answered. And I wasn't sure if I meant it as a permission or a promise he didn't follow. He didn't ask for a number or a name. He watched me choose my staircase, uptown exit, the one that spills you near the florist with the buckets of peonies even at midnight. And then he turned toward the other side, where the escalator lifts the city's polished men into newer rooms. I climbed. At the top, a breeze caught my braid and tugged. Harlem stretched ahead, warm and lit, the avenue stitched with headlights and laughter. Somewhere a siren unspooled, thin and distant. I pressed my hand to my chest the way you do when your body surprises you. And I told myself it was only the climb, only the night, only the echo of steel. But when I reached my door and slid the deadbolt home, I closed my eyes and felt the train sway again. The cup tapping both our shoes.
What is that?
The smile, the space he made without having to be asked. I was not thinking about love, I told myself once more. Then I turned on the kitchen light, and the room smelled like cinnamon. The cafe smelled of sugar and relief. We called it Azure Corner, though the sign outside had lost half its paint to sun and salt. Every morning, the bell over the door stuttered awake before I did, and the hum of the espresso machine joined the sound of gulls from the harbor. Life in Sag Harbor had a rhythm now. Dough rising before dawn. The chatter of locals trading gossip about whose cousin got a new boat. Zion's sleepy laughter from the back room. I liked that rhythm. It kept me from thinking about trains or men who looked at me like I was something they'd been missing without knowing it. That night on the Harlem platform had slipped into memory, the kind that stays faint but glowing. I hadn't seen him again, though sometimes I caught a face in a crowd or the corner of a newspaper photo and my heart stuttered for no reason. 4 years had passed and I'd convinced myself it was just a trick of city light and imagination, until the doorbell chimed and he walked in. He looked the same and completely different.
That's why I said dinner.
The same shoulders that filled the doorway, the same quiet composure, but now there was a stillness about him, a patience polished by time. His suit was tailored but relaxed, his tie gone again, his presence too deliberate to be accident. He glanced around as if trying to recall something that didn't belong to him. Then his eyes found me behind the counter, and whatever air was left in the room turned warm and fragile. "Nia," he said softly, like the word had been waiting under his tongue. I froze with a towel in my hand. Flour clung to my fingers and a laugh I didn't mean to give slipped out before I could stop it. "You remember me?" I tried not to, Malik said, smiling. "Didn't work." Zion ran past us with a toy airplane, his curls bouncing. Malik's gaze followed him. Curious first, then tender in a way that made my pulse trip. "He's yours?" "He's mine," I said, proud and cautious all at once. He nodded, no calculation in it. "He's beautiful." Silence stretched. Customers murmured at tables, coffee steamed, and I felt the years condense between us. Train to cafe, spark to calm, chance to choice. "What brings you here?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Work," he said. And maybe something else. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar. I made it myself, even though Jalen, my part-time barista, offered. The motion steadied me. Scoop, tamp, pull, pour. I slid the cup across the counter, and his fingers brushed mine this time, barely, but enough to make my skin remember everything it had once guessed. Still in the city? I asked, mostly. But I think I like the air here better. It's slower, I said. Maybe that's what I need. Zion crashed another plane, landing into a sugar jar. Malik chuckled, bent to help him pick up the pieces, and for a strange moment they looked like they belonged in the same frame. When he straightened, his expression gentled. You don't have to pretend you're not wondering why I came back. I am wondering, I admitted. He hesitated, then leaned in slightly, his voice lowering to something meant only for me. Because last time I didn't ask your name, and I've regretted it every day since. My throat tightened. There it was. The thing I'd never let myself name. The what if that had been haunting me like a melody unfinished. You're late, I said, meaning it as a tease, though my heart betrayed me by trembling. I'm here, he replied. That counts for something, and I couldn't argue with that. Outside, gulls dipped through gold light over the harbor. Inside, I realized I was smiling in a way I hadn't in years. Unguarded, foolish, alive. Malik Carter sat at a corner table, watching the world the way men do when they're planning to stay. And I knew then, this wasn't coincidence. It was a second chance that had been patient enough to wait. The evening folded over Sag Harbor like silk cooling after heat. The cafe had closed early. The lights dimmed to a honeyed hum while I wiped the counters one last time. Outside, the sea carried the sound of slow waves and faraway laughter from a pier where someone was playing music too soft to name. I thought Malik had gone hours ago. He'd stayed through the afternoon rush, talking quietly with a friend over coffee, tapping notes into his phone. When the doorbell had jingled earlier, I'd looked up half expecting it to be him again, and it wasn't. But as I stepped outside to lock up, there he was, leaning against the hood of a dark car parked by the curb, jacket folded neatly on one arm, sleeves rolled to the forearms like he belonged to the twilight. The streetlight caught on his watch and threw a small gleam across the pavement. He wasn't watching the door, just the sky, as if even the stars owed him their story. I froze. You waiting for someone?
Why are you here?
He turned, that calm curve of a smile finding me. Maybe I crossed my arms. That's vague. I thought about saying goodbye, he said, but it didn't feel right to end something that hasn't started yet. The words landed like the sound of a match striking, too quick, too sure. I wanted to laugh, to step back into the comfort of the known, to remind him I wasn't the kind of woman who believed in sentences like that anymore. But then he moved closer, slowly. Careful not to shorten the space too much. Nia, he said, my name more like a sigh than a statement. I'm not here to interrupt your peace. I just wanted a conversation, the kind you can't have between orders and espresso steam. I studied him. You think I owe you that? No, he said simply. I'm asking for it. The honesty in that answer did something to me. No grand charm, no push. Just a man holding his ground without taking mine. I looked past him to the horizon where the last ribbon of orange light faded into indigo. Zion was already asleep upstairs with my neighbor, the windows of my apartment glowing faintly above the shop. I could feel my heartbeat where it rested, between exhaustion and curiosity. So I nodded toward the bench near the curb. Fine, a conversation, we sat. The night smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. For a while, neither of us spoke. Cars whispered by, and a neon sign from the diner across the street blinked between pink and blue, painting us in borrowed light. You still bake? He asked. Every day. You always looked like someone who worked with her hands. That's one way to put it, I said. I used to think hands were just for defense. Turns out they're good for creation too. He smiled, slow and thoughtful. That's the difference between surviving and living. You sound like you've learned that yourself. I have, he said. Money can buy comfort, not peace. I think you found yours here. His gaze lingered on the cafe window where the reflection of our shadows stretched and merged on the glass. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I just stopped running long enough to build something that wouldn't move. He nodded. You built it well. I didn't know how to answer that. Compliments from him felt heavier, as though they carried truth instead of flattery. I shifted, pretending to watch a car turning the corner. "Malik," I said finally, "you seem like a man who doesn't come somewhere without a reason." He met my eyes. "I didn't. And I couldn't forget how you looked at me that night," he said. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. I spent years trying to tell myself I imagined it. My breath hitched. The streetlight hummed louder, or maybe it was just my pulse. "You did imagine it," I said, voice low. "People look at strangers all the time." "Not like that," he said quietly. "Not like we did." He wasn't wrong, and that was the problem. I stood, the motion sharper than I intended. "It's late." "I have an early morning." He rose too, giving me space again. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I said, but my voice betrayed the lie. He hesitated, then stepped back toward the car. "If you change your mind about that conversation or another one, my number's on your counter." I blinked. "You left your number?" He smiled. "You'd have thrown it away if I'd handed it to you." "Smart man," I muttered, unable to stop the corner of my mouth from lifting. "Persistent," he corrected. He opened the car door but didn't get in right away. "Good night, Nia." "Good night, Malik." He nodded once as though sealing a pact, then drove off into the blue hum of the town, taillights dissolving into the curve of the road. I stood there until they disappeared completely. Then I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and looked at the cafe window, where two blurred figures still lingered in reflection, one sitting, one standing. When I went back inside, there was a folded receipt by the register. On the back, his handwriting, steady, deliberate, just 3 words. "Don't run again." I should have torn it in half. Instead, I tucked it into the drawer where I keep things that scare me because they matter. 4 years carved themselves into the corners of my life like secret notches on a door frame. Quiet, visible only if you knew where to look. Zion grew tall enough to reach the countertop. The cafe walls traded old posters for his crayon drawings. The menu changed with the seasons. Peach pie in July, pumpkin spice in October, lemon tart that customers swore could fix heartbreak, and I stopped looking for Malik Carter. At least, that's what I told myself. Time had a way of smoothing memory until it looked harmless. I'd convinced myself that whatever had flickered between us on that night outside the cafe was just unfinished electricity. Something meant to fade. Life had moved on as it should. I had work, laughter, and a boy who thought I hung the moon every morning before school. But fate, or maybe something far less romantic and far more stubborn, didn't care for neat endings. It was a Thursday. Late spring. The cafe's door kept swinging open with locals escaping the drizzle. I was wiping down the pastry case when the bell chimed again. "Good morning," a low voice said. I didn't look up right away. I was busy replacing the lemon tarts, but the sound of it, warm, steady, unmistakable, slipped straight into my bones. When I finally raised my eyes, the world slowed just enough for my heart to remember how to stumble. Malik stood there, the same man but different in ways that made time ache. A touch of gray at his temple, a softness around the eyes that didn't weaken him, it humanized him. He wore no tie this time, just a dark sweater, sleeves pushed to the elbows like the first time I saw him. The rain had kissed his shoulders. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. He smiled. Not the practiced kind people wear when they walk into a store, but the kind you give when you finally found something you didn't know you were still looking for. "Still making cinnamon rolls this good?" he asked, nodding toward the display. The words landed lightly, but their weight was unbearable. "Depends who's asking," I managed. "Someone who's been meaning to come back," he said. Zion, now 7, peeked out from the kitchen door, clutching his sketchbook. "Mama, this guy wants something?" Malik turned toward him, crouched slightly, and smiled. "I think I do. You must be Zion." Zion blinked, suspicious but curious, the way kids are with strangers who feel too familiar. "Do I know you?" "Not yet," Malik said gently. "But maybe we'll fix that." I cleared my throat before the moment got heavier than it already was. "Coffee?" "Always," he said, taking a seat by the window, the same one he'd sat at years ago. I busied myself behind the counter, pretending not to glance his way. The rain tapped softly against the glass. I poured his coffee, added a touch of cream before I remembered he'd always taken it black. I almost started over, then left it as it was. When I set the cup before him, he looked up. "Still working too hard?" I shrugged. "Still trying to." He laughed quietly. I remember that tone. What tone? The one that says you don't need anyone's help, even when you're carrying too much. I froze, the echo of 4 years folding into the space between us. People change, I know, he said. I just hope some things hadn't. I met his gaze, ready to deflect with humor, but the sincerity there disarmed me. Outside, the rain turned to a whisper. Inside, something old began to breathe again. Zion broke the moment with perfect timing. Mama, can I draw him? Malik grinned. Only if you make me look taller. Zion giggled, pulling up a chair. And just like that, like it was the most natural thing in the world, the man I'd once met on a Harlem train was sitting in my cafe, drinking coffee with my son, under a roof that smelled like cinnamon and forgiveness. When closing time came and Zion had fallen asleep on the couch, Malik stood by the door, his coat folded over one arm. You ever think about that night? He asked quietly. Sometimes, I admitted. Mostly when I can't sleep. He nodded, rain still glittering in his hair. Me too. And then, like he'd done before, he didn't push. Didn't ask for more than the moment could hold. Good night, Nia, he said. This time I stopped him before he reached the door. Malik, he turned. Come back tomorrow, I said. The cinnamon rolls are better fresh. He smiled. The kind of smile that meant I will. And for the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something that had already passed. I felt like something had quietly begun again. The next few days unfurled like a movie caught between rewind and fast forward. Malik kept showing up. Always at the same table, always at the same hour, as if time itself had been trained to expect him. He didn't talk much at first. Sometimes he read. Sometimes he worked on his laptop. Sometimes he just watched the harbor through the fogged window while his untouched coffee cooled beside him. But every day he was there. And every day the silence between us learned new meanings. Less about distance, more about comfort. I told myself it was harmless. Customers came and went. The cafe stayed open. He was just another familiar face in the hum of routine. But deep down I knew better. The air around him carried a gravity that kept pulling me closer no matter how carefully I tried to orbit. On the 5th day, as I wiped down the counter, he said, You ever eat anywhere that isn't your own cafe? I looked up. Not often. That sounds like a tragedy, he said, standing. Dinner tonight, my treat. I hesitated, glancing toward the kitchen. I have a kid, Malik. I know, he said softly. That's why I asked for dinner, not midnight. I'll have you home before bedtime. I should have said no. Every reason I'd rehearsed was still lined up neatly in my mind. But something about the ease in his tone, the lack of pressure, disarmed me completely. Fine, I said at last. Dinner, but nothing fancy. He smiled. Nia, I don't do fancy. I do good. We met at the Mariner's Table, a small restaurant tucked near the docks. The kind of place that smelled like grilled lemon and ocean salt, where the candles burned low and the jazz sounded just out of reach. Malik was already there when I arrived, sleeves rolled, collar open, posture relaxed but eyes alert, as if he'd been waiting for this moment longer than he'd admit. You look... He stopped himself, smiled. Happy? Dangerous word, I said, sitting across from him. Maybe, he said. But true. The waiter brought wine. I stuck to water. We talked about harmless things at first. Travel, food, the way Sag Harbor looked in winter when the tourists left and the ocean got louder. Then, between the laughter and the pauses, the truth started to rise like tidewater. So, he said, tracing the rim of his glass. Zion's father? The question wasn't invasive, just inevitable. I stared down at my plate. His name's Darius. We're not in touch. By choice. By survival, I said quietly. Malik nodded once, not prying, not pitying. He hurt you? I met his eyes. Enough to make me stop believing people when they said the word forever. He didn't flinch. Then they said it wrong. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy with understanding. You don't have to prove anything to me, Nia, he added. You built a life out of ashes. I just want to know you. Not the version that survived, but the woman who still wakes up wanting more. I wasn't sure when my eyes began to sting. Maybe from relief. Maybe from fear of it. Why, I asked. You barely know me. Because I've spent years building things that didn't matter, he said. And when I walked into your cafe, I remembered what did. I exhaled, shaky, caught between disbelief and the warmth creeping into my chest. You make everything sound simple, I murmured.
Feel right ending
It's
something
not
that
simple, he said.
hasn't started
It's just
yet.
worth it. The food came and went, but neither of us cared much for it. Conversation turned soft, then quiet, then into that wordless recognition that doesn't need translation. When we stepped outside, the night air was cool and alive with sea wind. The moon hung low, painting silver on the water. Malik walked beside me to my car. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I should be thanking you," I replied, "for reminding me what it feels like to be seen." He smiled, small, unguarded, real. "Get used to it." As I opened the door, he stopped me with a look that said more than he spoke. "I won't rush you," he said. "But I'm not leaving again, for once." I didn't tell him not to. When I got home, Zion was asleep on the couch, sketchbook fallen open beside him, a half-finished drawing of a man and a woman standing under the cafe's neon sign. For a long while, I just stood there watching it, wondering what he'd already seen that I hadn't yet dared to name. Weeks passed, and Malik became a rhythm I didn't plan but somehow couldn't unlearn. Every morning, he stopped by the cafe, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for nothing at all. He'd sit near the window with his laptop, pretending to work while Zion built small Lego towers beside him. Every now and then I'd catch him watching us, eyes soft and unguarded, as if this simple picture was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever witnessed. It should have made me nervous. It didn't. It made me feel safe, and that was far more dangerous. He wasn't the kind of man who chased. He didn't need to. He was the kind who waited, steady, patient, certain. The kind who made you want to be caught on your own terms. Sometimes I'd hand him his coffee and our fingers would brush. Sometimes he'd linger near the counter while I mixed dough, asking questions he already knew the answers to. "Why cinnamon every morning?" "It smells like peace," I'd say. He'd grin. "Then your whole cafe smells like you." And I'd pretend not to blush, turning away before he could see what that smile did to me. Zion adored him. He'd draw little doodles of Malik's car, of the two of them standing with mugs of hot chocolate, of our small trio sitting under a sign that read, "Azure Family Cafe."
You seem like a man.
The name made me
Does
laugh,
not come somewhere
but it
without a
also
reason.
made something deep inside me ache with longing I didn't know I still had.
I didn't.
One afternoon, the sky broke open with summer rain. Thunder rolled over the harbor and customers fled inside, dripping and laughing.
So why are you
Malik
here?
arrived drenched, shirt clinging to him, hair slick against his temples. "You walked through that?" I asked, handing him a towel. "Didn't trust the umbrella," he said, laughing. "Besides, I figured you'd be here." Zion giggled from his spot behind the counter. "Mama's always here." "Then I'm lucky," Malik said. And the way he said it made me forget the sound of the storm entirely. When the rush cleared and the rain softened to a whisper, he helped me stack chairs and mop the floor. It became habit, him helping, me pretending I didn't notice how natural it felt. At one point, I lost my grip on a glass and it shattered.
Not like that.
I cursed softly.
Not like we did.
Malik knelt immediately, gathering the larger shards with bare hands. "Careful," I said, kneeling too. Our fingers brushed again, this time
It's
deliberate.
late.
He didn't pull away. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the storm's distant sigh. The world seemed to narrow until it was just that small space between us. "Nia," he said quietly. My name sounded different in his mouth, heavier, deeper, like a confession. I looked up. His face was close enough that I could see the rain still glistening on his lashes. I could smell the faint trace of cedar and coffee on his skin. My pulse stumbled, but instead of kissing me, he smiled, soft and almost sad. "Not yet," he whispered. "When you're ready." Then he stood, threw the last piece of glass into the bin, and walked to the door, leaving behind the kind of silence that hurts and heals at the same time. When he left, I sat on the floor longer than I should have, heart pounding, palms trembling, trying to name the feeling clawing through my chest. It wasn't fear, it was want. Pure, patient, terrifying want. That night, after closing, I found Zion asleep again on the couch, Malik's jacket draped over him like a blanket. And I realized then that somehow, quietly, without permission or promise, Malik Carter had found his way into our little world. And worse, into my heart. And I was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, I wanted him to stay. The summer heat lingered that evening, heavy as honey. The cafe was dark except for the amber light spilling from the window. Zion had gone to a weekend sleepover at my neighbor's, leaving the apartment upstairs quieter than I'd ever known it. I'd planned to rest, maybe read, maybe fall asleep to the hum of the ceiling fan. But my phone buzzed just once, lighting up with a message that felt inevitable. Malik, you still awake? I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. Nia, barely. Malik, good. That means you won't overthink it. Step outside. I hesitated, heart skipping in ways that made no sense. Then I slipped on a loose sweater, tied my hair, and walked out to the quiet street. He was there, leaning against the same car where we'd once talked years ago. Same stillness, same calm gravity that pulled the world toward him. Only now the look in his eyes carried something deeper, something unspoken but steady. You don't sleep much, do you? I asked. Not when I'm thinking about you, he said simply. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You're trouble, Malik Carter, he smiled. Only if you let me be. We walked to the harbor where the water mirrored the sky's last sliver of purple. The wind tangled my hair and he reached out, gentle, hesitant, to tuck one strand behind my ear. That single touch undid every wall I'd built around myself. I didn't speak, neither did he. Words would have cheapened the quiet understanding hanging between us. When I turned toward him, the look in his eyes said what neither of us dared to. He lifted a hand, paused, giving me the choice. I didn't step back. The first kiss wasn't fireworks. It was surrender. Slow, patient, the kind that feels like an answer to a question you never said aloud. He pulled away first, his forehead resting against mine. You okay? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Tell me if it's too much, he whispered. I've waited this long. I can wait longer. That broke me a little, the kindness in it, the restraint. So I reached for his hand, fingers threading with his. Don't, I said softly. Don't wait tonight. He looked at me then, really looked, as if memorizing every breath. We went upstairs to my apartment, where the faint smell of cinnamon still lingered from the morning bake. He paused at the doorway as if stepping into sacred space, not conquest. Everything that followed existed in soft fragment, his hand tracing the outline of my face, my laughter breaking through nervous silence, the world shrinking until it was only heartbeat and warmth. The night didn't rush. It unfolded, careful, reverent, whole. No grand declarations, no promises shouted into the dark. Just two people rediscovering what it meant to be held without fear. When dawn crept through the window, I woke to find him sitting beside me, fully dressed, coffee mug in hand, watching the light crawl across the room. You were right, he murmured when he saw me stir. About what? Cinnamon, he said, smiling. It really does smell like peace. I laughed softly, pulling the sheet closer. And what does this smell like? He leaned down, brushed a kiss across my forehead. Home. For the first time in years, that word didn't scare me. It felt like something I might actually deserve. The days that followed carried a strange kind of calm, the kind that makes you believe. The storm might have changed its mind. Malik had begun, spending more evenings at the cafe, helping me close up while Zion doodled in his sketchbook or counted tips from the jar. We moved around each other like two people who had learned the other's rhythm by instinct. The way to pass behind one another in the narrow kitchen. When to reach, when to stop, when to simply breathe, it was ordinary. And in that ordinariness, it was beautiful. Until the night the knock came, it was just past dusk. The harbor lights flickered against the windows, and Zion was upstairs brushing his teeth while Malik wiped the last crumbs off a table. The sound was sharp, 3 hard raps against the glass door. I turned, towel still in hand. No one ever knocked that late. Malik's expression changed instantly, the quiet warmth replaced by alert stillness. He moved before I did, stepping toward the door. Outside stood a man I hadn't seen in years but had prayed never to again. Darius. He looked rougher, angrier, a life carved by his own bad choices. The smirk on his face was the same, though, sharp and cruel enough to slice through years of peace in a heartbeat. Well, well, he said through the glass, voice dripping with familiarity. Didn't expect you'd end up serving coffee to strangers. My hands trembled. Zion, I whispered. He's upstairs. Malik glanced back, his voice low but firm. Stay here. No, Malik. But he'd already opened the door. Evening, Malik said
Oh
evenly.
my goodness.
You need something? Darius's eyes slid over him, narrowing.
Who the hell are you?
The man standing between you and what doesn't belong to you anymore. Darius laughed, mean and hollow. I just came to see my son. You lost that right, I said from behind Malik. You signed it away when you disappeared. I didn't disappear, he spat. You ran. The words hit cruel and familiar. The old fear rose like cold water. I felt the air tighten, my pulse pounding in my ears. Malik didn't move. You need to leave. Darius stepped forward, eyes burning with something that looked a lot like desperation. You think she belongs to you now? Malik's jaw tightened. She doesn't belong to anyone. But she's safe, and I won't let you take that from her. Zion's voice echoed faintly from upstairs. Mama? The sound cut through everything. I moved without thinking, stepping in front of Malik, my voice shaking. Go back to bed, baby. It's okay. Darius's eyes flicked toward the stairs, and that was enough. Malik stepped forward, blocking his line of sight completely. You heard her, he said quietly. Leave. For a heartbeat, I thought Darius might swing, his hands balled, knuckles white. But something in Malik's stare must have told him it wouldn't end well. He sneered. This isn't over. Yeah, Malik said. It is. Darius turned, kicked a trash can on his way out, and disappeared into the dark. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen until Malik reached for me, gently guiding me to a chair. Hey, he said softly. Breathe. My chest stuttered before the air came out shaky and uneven.
Me too.
I thought he was gone for good.
Really nice to just
He is now, Malik
sit
said.
and talk.
His tone was calm, but his eyes were storm bright. I nodded, staring at the floor. He won't stop. Then we'll make sure he can't, Malik said. Tomorrow we'll talk to someone. Lawyer, police, whatever it takes. You don't have to face him alone anymore. I looked up at him then. Really looked. At the steadiness, the unflinching certainty. The quiet promise beneath his words for years. Safety had been something I built alone. That night, I realized it could also be something shared. When he finally left, I locked the door behind him, pressed my forehead against the glass, and whispered a prayer into the silence. It wasn't just fear I felt anymore. It was the first spark of resolve, a promise to protect the life we'd built,
What is that?
no matter what came next. Morning came gray and thin, the kind of light that feels like it's holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Every sound during the night, a car door, a gust of wind, had pulled me upright, half expecting another knock. Malik arrived before sunrise. He didn't say a word at first, just set a warm cup of coffee on the counter and waited for my shaking hands to still enough to take it. I called someone, he said finally. A friend, lawyer in Manhattan. She owes me a few favors. We'll make this official. Malik, he stopped me with a look, not demanding, just steady. You told me once you got tired of surviving. Let's not go back there. We're building something different now. His voice, calm and grounded, steadied the air around me. I nodded, quietly grateful. By noon, we were sitting in a small office above the town's legal center.
Not often.
The lawyer, Angela Brooks, was sharp-eyed and kind-spoken, the sort of woman who could dismantle a threat with paperwork alone.
Tonight.
After listening to everything, she leaned back in her chair. You've already got full custody, Nia. What we'll do now is file for a protection order. If he comes near you or Zion again, he'll be arrested. The thought of dragging Darius into court made my stomach twist, but Malik reached across the table and covered my hand with his. You're not alone in this, he said quietly. Angela smiled faintly.
Fine.
You've got a good one there. I looked at Malik. Yeah, I said softly. I do. The days that followed blurred into motion, signatures, hearings, statements. Each time I walked into that courthouse, the ghosts of old fear tried to claw their way back. But Malik was always there. He never spoke for me, only beside me. Sometimes that's the difference between rescue and partnership. Zion sensed the tension but didn't understand it. Is the bad man gone? He asked one night, clutching his stuffed bear. He won't hurt us again, I said, brushing his curls back. Because Mama's not alone anymore. Malik was standing in the doorway, quiet. When I looked up, our eyes met and something unspoken passed between us. A vow without ceremony. A week later, the judge signed the papers. The restraining order was official. It should have felt like the end of something, but it felt more like the beginning of peace. When we walked out into the sunlight, I could finally breathe again. Malik slipped his hand into mine and I didn't pull away. Now what? I asked. He smiled. Now we live. That evening, back at the cafe, the regulars trickled in. Laughter, chatter, the smell of coffee wrapping around the air like safety. Zion helped me serve cupcakes while Malik fixed a loose hinge on the front door. For the first time in years, the sound of the bell above the door didn't make me flinch. Later, when the shop was empty, Malik sat across from me, sleeves rolled up, wrists still dusted with flour from helping Zion bake. "You know," he said, "you're the strongest woman I've ever met." I smiled. "You say that like it's a compliment." "It is," he said. "But you don't have to be strong all the time." Something inside me cracked, the soft kind of breaking that makes space for warmth to seep in. "You mean I can lean on you?" He nodded. "Whenever you forget how to breathe." I laughed through the tears I didn't bother hiding. "That might be often. Then I'll be here often." Outside, the harbor lights shimmered against the water, reflecting everything we'd survived and everything still waiting ahead. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't a fairy tale, but it was ours. And sometimes, that's the most radical kind of happy there is. Spring came early that year. The air smelled like salt and sugar, the way it does when the tide turns warm again and the cafe windows stay open past sunset. The world had finally stopped feeling like something I had to guard myself against. Malik had stayed, not with grand gestures, but with quiet, steady presence. Morning coffee runs, school drop-offs, paperwork, bedtime stories that ended with Zion asleep against his shoulder. Our lives had knit themselves together so naturally that one day I realized I could no longer tell where his routine ended and mine began. The cafe had grown busier too. Locals called it the happy place by the harbor. They said it was because of the pastries, but I knew better. It was the peace that had settled here, the kind that came from rebuilding with love instead of fear. One evening after closing, Malik called me outside. The garden behind the cafe was in full bloom. Wisteria vines curled along the fence, fairy lights draped between the branches. Zion had strung them himself earlier, giggling at how magical they looked. Malik stood beneath the lights, hands tucked into his pockets, watching me the way he had the first day we met, steady, patient, as though every second had led him here. "I used to think happiness was noise," he said quietly. "Meetings, flights, numbers, all of it loud enough to drown out the silence I didn't want to face." I smiled. "And now?" "Now it's this," he said, gesturing toward the cafe windows glowing behind me. "You, Zion, the smell of cinnamon at 6 a.m., the sound of your laugh when you think no one's listening. Malik," he stepped closer, eyes never leaving mine. "You taught me something, Nia. That peace isn't something you find, it's something you build, and you let me build it with you." Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a small box, the light catching on a simple gold band. Nothing extravagant, just honest. My breath caught. He didn't kneel. He didn't need to. He took my hand and said, "You've already given me a home. Let me spend the rest of my life protecting it." The world went soft around us, the rustle of leaves, the sea breathing somewhere beyond the fence, Zion's small gasp of excitement from the window above. "Yes," I whispered, because anything louder would have broken the moment. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit as though it had been waiting for me all along. Zion burst through the door, barefoot, hair a mess of curls. "Did she say yes?" Malik laughed, scooping him up. "She did." Zion grinned at me, wide and proud. "Told you he'd stay, Mama." I wrapped them both in my arms, the kind of hug that feels like roots finally settling into soil. Later that night, after Zion had fallen asleep and the harbor had gone quiet, Malik and I sat on the back steps, our hands intertwined. "You ever think about that first night?" he asked. "The train?" He nodded. "I think the universe was tired of watching us circle each other." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. Maybe it just wanted to make sure we'd both learned how to wait. He kissed my forehead. Worth every second. The waves rolled somewhere beyond the dark. The cafe lights flickered against the water. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder what came next. I already knew. It was this: laughter, warmth, the smell of cinnamon and sea air, and a love that had found its home. Not in perfection, but in peace.